everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It is June, it is Francis, it is Nate. Nate, how are things going on Hell Island, which is unlike just a Hell Peninsula, which is what I live on, I guess. It's not really a peninsula, is it? It's just a hell landmass.
Yeah, to me, when I think of Hell Peninsula in America, I think of Florida, and I think of the San Francisco Peninsula, and then I suppose part of Seattle is a peninsula, but Seattle's not really hell. It's kind of more... hell, we're cold and a variety of things. So weirdly, it's been cold here. I think that there's, all these insane atmospheric problems taking place with, the huge heat bubble happening in the eastern part of Washington State and Oregon, where right on the Columbia River and the Snake River confluence, they're looking at potentially temperatures over 120. Which is insane, would be absolute record-breaking for that part of the U.S. By the same token, Northern Europe is on an extreme sort of divide where you have this big boundary of storms, and north of it, it's really unseasonably cold, and south of it, it's very, very hot. So Mediterranean parts of Europe are extremely hot right now, whereas here in the United Kingdom, we legit had the space heater on because it's fucking cold. It was in the low 50s at night, which for June is pretty cold. I mean, it's not unseasonably cold because this country's by and large the weather's pretty mild across the board, but
it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. We had turned the heat down overall to stop the heat from coming on during days when it was hot, very hot in the daytime, and I hadn't turned it back up, and then I realized in the middle of the night, I'm like, it's actually really fucking cold. I need to turn the space heater back on. So space heater has not been put away. But other than that, things are good, especially sunny today. I'm going to go for a run after we're done recording. It's going to be the equivalent of 72 and sunny today. So it's nice. It's getting back. But yeah, it's just been rainy and cold. There was that brief intermission of it feeling like paradise. And then it went back to the way the weather is basically 90% of the year, which is between 50 and 60 and cold, windy and rainy. Which, when they say mild, what they mean is it's not freezing and it's not boiling. That doesn't mean it's comfortable.
You're not getting Minnesota temperatures in the cold, but it's still not great because at least Minnesota is built for the cold. England is not built for anything.
And also I've said this so many times before, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but there's always the British have this maxim they repeat to themselves that, our houses are built to trap heat and that's why it's so bad in the summer. It's apparently your houses are also built to trap cold in the winter. I think the problem is they're built badly with bad insulation or no insulation. In our case, our house has zero insulation. There is none. It's brick and concrete, and that's it. So if you were in Iraq or Afghanistan in buildings like that, when it gets cold in the winter, you know what it's like. The walls become cold radiators. It sucks the heat out. And especially this is an incredibly windy country too. So the houses being drafty and stuff, the heat leaks out. And yeah, there's the joke of sort of perfect entropy in Britain when wind power is powering all the electric grid, but also overpowering the grid with demand for heat because the wind is sucking all the heat out of everyone's house. But things are fine. Like I said, I'm going to go out and take advantage of the nice weather. Just been to no good, I suppose, doing the regular shit that I always do. How have you been? How is Missouri?
Missouri is going through some strange... we had an actual spring, which is very difficult for me to process. Usually in May, it's just swelteringly hot. So, all of this... I watch California having another drought year. I see, 118 degrees in Siberia inside of the Arctic Circle. And I poke my head out and it's well, thank goodness I was born into apparently the most perfect climate to weather all of this. So, looking forward to my tiny house in about 20 years being worth $3 million because it's on a small island surrounded by ocean. Also pulled my garlic up, so I have that going for me. I don't know if you saw my picture.
I did, all my yeah, they look good as hell. My garlic, the greens are gigantic on the garlic and onions. I planted some peppers, but the snails and slugs killed 2 out of the 3 of them overnight. For some reason, they left the one alone, so it's actually thriving, but... and it'll obviously would benefit a lot from this heat. But yeah, the hater worms came out and destroyed it, even though they've got lots of green things all over the place because they don't like green things that grow in nature. They like things that you care about, and they don't even want to eat them. They just want to destroy them because slugs and snails are the most British of all creatures.
Slugs and snails are a 5-year-old.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it?
Yeah, I had to chase a bunny was trying to build a burrow in my garlic because I have all the garlic was overwintered, so it was really deep into the ground. The greens were huge, and also I put a layer of I mulched it with grass clippings, so I had a layer of nice dry grass clippings on top and everything. And I went out and saw a rabbit just like in between the garlic. Didn't fuck with the garlic, but like dug a trench and then started building. And I was like, you gotta, I can't let you do this. So now that the garlic's all out, I don't give a shit, but he'll probably, the rabbit will have to deal with the mice that also live in the garden. So who knows? All of these things, all of this garden is all like, 30 feet away from the house. And it's very like, I used to live in a house that had mice just because it was an old drafty house with a lot of holes in it. Very much excited to not have that situation here and just let the mice live in the compost, the multiple compost heaps that I have going on.
Well, I got to be honest with you. I personally am looking forward to being able to harvest some stuff. I really hope that I can get some peppers before it gets too cold to grow them. I think the spot they're in is better this year. I definitely look forward to using my onions and garlic. I had a dream that I was going to be able to make spaghetti sauce, like marinara sauce, with only stuff I grew in my own garden. Obviously, like, the salt and the pepper and the olive oil I didn't grow myself.
You go to the ocean, you pull some water out, and you dry it until you get the sea salt, and you scrape it off.
I created a greenhouse to replicate a Mediterranean climate at immense personal cost for the energy bills involved with both warming and dehumidifying it. If
you start building an olive grove now, in about 50 years, you'll have olive oil.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, I was hoping to. Tomatoes that didn't happen. I must have messed something up with my propagator, and it's too late now, so I'll probably do it next year. But I did manage to get some really healthy ají chilies, like Peruvian chilies, and so I'm looking forward to making fried rice with those if I can get a couple of them at least just to grow. I had hoped that letting my parsley bolt and go to seed would attract all the slugs and snails there, and they would. And it has to some extent. They've been basically climbing trees to eat parsley leaves. But the other plants, as soon as I put them down, it was like the hater worms picked up the scent and came out to destroy them all.
Can't you put down salt or something?
Isn't I put down pellets. They didn't really seem to do much for the two, but the barrier I created of pellets seems to have kept them away from the third one. So I have a couple more that that are in a propagator. I'm going to try to plant them and see if they can survive. And then I've got like a garden tent that this time of year gets pretty good light. So I'm going to put them in there and see. And hopefully between, I think, like 5 or 6 plants, I should be like last year. I got one fucking jalapeno out of all the peppers I grew. But I did get that jalapeno, and I used it in fried rice. So
it is mine. God damn it.
I hope to get the same from these ají chilies. And I've learned quite a bit about propagators and stuff and making that work and not giving too much light and not giving too much or too little water and how to sort of like slowly introduce them to open air and stuff. So my hope is that my fledgling plant growing abilities will develop, and if not this year, then definitely next year. I'll completely max this shit out. I certainly have a healthy compost pile going, so which is pretty cool to be able to like recycle all of our food waste and put it back in the ground. So that makes me feel weirdly happy. But
you feel like less of a shitty American that just throws everything away. You're just like, look, I'll put the food that I bought and didn't eat can go into the compost.
Yeah, and all of our food waste in the sense of like table scraps and stuff. Because I have a hot composter, I can put bones in there. I can put meat in there and stuff like that, and it doesn't really cause a problem. It's not like scavengers or horrible smell or anything like that. It works pretty well. I mean, I think that composting in general does emit methane. Like that's just the natural part of decomposition. So, it may not necessarily be a big panacea for, call it, greenhouse gas emissions and things along those lines. But as someone who doesn't have a car, who cycles everywhere, walks everywhere, takes public transit, to be able to do this, I mean, it's cool as shit. I really dig it. I mean, like, even if I didn't, the fact that we have compost pickup for our trash services is pretty cool too. And that is something that I've seen in America in some places, but I never lived in a neighborhood in New York that was bougie enough to have it.
We have green dumpsters. Like we have our trash dumpsters, our recycling, single stream recycling, and then our green dumpsters. And it's great too because like a mile, 2 miles from where I am at our YMCA, there's a big the forestry, the St. Louis City Forestry Division has like a headquarters and a lot of their trucks over there. They have the big area right next to the train tracks. There's not a whole lot going on down there if they didn't have this, but they just compost. Like they just have, hundreds of feet of 20-foot, 30-foot high compost that they get from all the composting. They pull it in from all of the green waste. They process all of it. They mulch it up. Some of it gets turned into mulch, and some of it they just heap it. And then you watch it slowly break down over the year, and then they start shuttling it out so that you, me, and anybody else can come by with buckets and trucks and take away fresh city compost. Now, look, sometimes you have to pick a used condom out, but it's free, and that's what's important.
Yeah, that rules. Honestly, I've never gotten compost from my council or whatever, but it is. I know they do use it for things like gardening, landscaping, etc. And I appreciate the fact that they do have it. And like I said, I hope to develop my fledgling garden ability over time and eventually be able to completely defeat the hater worms and actually be able to grow a lot of stuff in my back garden. But sometimes fledgling operations don't work out. And in the case of a fledgling operation that's been fledgling for 20 years and has never actually taken flight, we have the sad, unfortunate news of the fact that the Taliban are rolling up Afghanistan all over. And we have a story from CNN that I'm going to read really briefly to discuss the conditions, the situation that's happening. So, as many of you know, since the U.S. announced that there was going to be a full withdrawal from Afghanistan in May, the Taliban have basically been conducting an offensive since May 1st. And this piece came out today, actually, or rather yesterday evening. And the headline is 50 of Afghanistan's 370 districts have fallen to Taliban since May, according to UN envoy. 50 of Afghanistan's 370 districts have fallen to Taliban militants since May, according to the UN Special Envoy on Afghanistan, Deborah Lyons, as the United States continues its military withdrawal from the country. Quote, Taliban recent advances are even more significant and are as a result of an intensified military campaign. More than 50 of Afghanistan's 370 districts have fallen since the beginning of May, Lyons told UN Security Council on Tuesday. Most districts that have been taken surround provincial capitals, suggesting the Taliban are positioning themselves to try and take these capitals once foreign forces are fully withdrawn, Lyons continued. The news came as a local power company told media Tuesday that violent clashes had damaged key electrical infrastructure, causing power outages in 11 provinces, including Kabul. Over the last 24 hours, Taliban fighters have taken control of several districts in Kunduz province and the important border crossing with Tajikistan, according to Rabbani, a member of the Kunduz Provincial Council. The districts include Chahardara, Khanabad, Imam Sahib, and as well as Shirkhan Bandar, a crossing point with Tajikistan, Rabbani said. One of them, the Chahardara district, fell without a fight in order to prevent civilian casualties, Rabbani added. The latest Taliban gains are in areas not traditionally under their control. Over the weekend, the Taliban claimed it had overrun an Afghan army base in Balkh Governorate in the north of the country. A Taliban propaganda video shows the group of militants inside a military base confiscating military vehicles and weapons. They claimed in another video that they had taken control of the Afghan National Army Humvees in Tahar province in the northeast. The group also claimed in another propaganda video that dozens of Afghan forces surrendered to Taliban in Faryab province in the north of the country. Afghan security officials could not confirm or deny these claims to CNN, and CNN cannot verify the authenticity of the videos or the date they were filmed. In April, U.S. President Joe Biden formally announced his decision to end America's longest war, deeming the prolonged and intractable conflict in Afghanistan no longer in alignment with American priorities. Biden said he would withdraw troops from Afghanistan before September 11th, the 20th anniversary of the terrorist attacks that catalyzed the war on terror. Those origins had long given way to other objectives, and Biden declared that no amount of time or money could solve the problems that his three predecessors had tried and failed to fix. Biden is planning to meet with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah, the head of the country's High Council for National Reconciliation, which oversees the government's negotiation team. Quote, the United States will remain deeply engaged with the government of Afghanistan to ensure the country never again becomes a safe haven for terrorist groups who pose a threat to the U.S. homeland, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Monday.
Fucking womp womp on that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think something that I experienced, and maybe you experienced this too, you were there, if I'm not mistaken, Francis, you were there twice, once in the very early part of the war, and then once much later, even later than I was there.
No, I was in Iraq the second time around.
Oh, okay.
But I was Afghanistan 04.
04, okay. So I was in Afghanistan from 09 to 10, and, I have friends, to include our Zoomer correspondent, Kevin Frint, who were there much more recently. Kevin was there from 2018 to 2019. And I believe it may actually have been later than that. And my experience has been that while there were some elements of the Afghan military that the U.S. had trained that did function quite well, on a whole, they really just did not have. There wasn't really much commitment to fighting because it was kind of an artificial creation. You had this group of people who were sort of in the interests of not having locals being the security forces for the places they're from. They would bring in, send units of recruits from the northern part of the country to the south and so on. And, they speak different languages, there are different ethnicities there, and there's just not really a whole lot of desire to really go for it in these communities, much less establish rapport with people there. And
it is not the melting pot that the United States military is, which, well, don't get me wrong, like, we definitely have like problems of racism and sexism in the US Army. But yeah, like you're saying, Afghanistan, people don't understand. Afghanistan is essentially in a lot of ways two different countries. There's two completely different languages spoken. There's a multitude of different ethnicities. And in Afghanistan, it's not like, you can hop in your car. Like, I can hop in my car and I can be in Memphis in a couple of hours, or I can be in Kansas City in a couple of hours. And, everybody is like, it's different, but it's mostly the same. You don't really have that from part to part in Afghanistan. These countries that don't have like large communication like we do aren't it's hard. Like you wonder, people ask like how are these places falling to the Taliban? It's like they can't just like, hey, you soldiers get into Humvees or get into airplanes and fly over there and protect things. Like, if needed, we can have the 82nd Airborne anywhere in 24 hours. Like, if it really came down to it, we can grab a bunch of people and send them somewhere. You don't have that in Afghanistan. And to tack on to what you're reading, there's also a Time story about how Afghans are basically forming their own militias against the Taliban, because this isn't some like, oh, we just love the Taliban, the Americans are gone, we're going to let them come in. Of course not. But like you said, the army itself, it was always a facade. It was always this thing that we stood up, and people wanted to be there because we said, hey, we'll give you a steady paycheck. But like, as soon as somebody gets shot at, it's like, oh, well, I can get a paycheck fucking somewhere else.
Also, I would point out, too, that the insurgents paid better than the army. Yeah. And we've talked about this before on this show, that they don't embezzle the salaries of their fighters the way that the Afghan security forces do. The corruption that's there is just immense. And like you said, Afghanistan is... The borders of Afghanistan are arbitrary in the south because they were drawn by the British in, I believe, the 1880s, and the agreement under the Durand Line was finalized in 1890. The expectation was that it would hold for 100 years and then it would revert to the original border. However, that border was meant to create a buffer state between the Russian Empire and British India. And then obviously in 1947, when India became independent and partition took place, you had the creation of the state of Pakistan. And so a significant chunk of what is now Pakistan is what it would be considered the sort of ethnic Pashtun homeland, particularly parts of what the Northwest was called the Northwest Frontier Province, and the federally administered tribal areas. So you basically have a huge chunk of what was Afghanistan and what was supposed to revert to Afghanistan in 1990 as part of Pakistan. And if you know anything about Pakistan, it's a deranged and paranoid state. Quite frankly,
that has nukes.
It has nukes. It's just
very surprising that if there's one thing to say about the hesitance to use nuclear technology, it is definitely Pakistan and India, who both have nukes and have managed to not nuke each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll put it this way. You could make the argument that Punjab and Sindh could ostensibly be part of India, although because of partition, they completely ethnically cleansed it. And similarly on the Indian side, like don't take this as just an attack on Pakistan. Obviously, India is governed by hideous fascists at this point, and it was equally guilty in 1947. But you could make an argument that Punjab and Sindh could be part of India, Baluchistan could be independent, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and the Northwest Frontier Province could be reverted to Afghanistan, and thus Pakistan wouldn't exist anymore. But that's not going to happen, obviously. And so you're in a situation where the legacy of British colonialism has created this bizarre situation in which, half of Afghanistan belongs to Pakistan. The border isn't really super aggressively enforced, but obviously, in terms of military action, Afghanistan has no control over a part of what was formerly its borders, which are the staging area and training areas for Pakistani-financed insurgents to attack Afghanistan. In the north, the border is more coherent. There's a river border that, for most of it, that corresponds largely to the historical borders of Afghanistan, although that's still kind of a vague concept. It's border with Iran, similarly, like not as arbitrary, but its southern border is completely arbitrary. And so you have the situation where, if you're from some of these places that they're describing, these are areas where people speak Dari. A lot of the ethnicities there would be Tajik or Turkmen or...
I was going to say, if we want to talk about fucked up Afghan borders, we can also talk about how there's the Wakhan Corridor Nature Refuge, which is just let's make a little Afghan peninsula so Tajikistan and India, Pakistan don't have to touch each other.
There's even a very small border with China. In Wuhan, and Wuhan is like so unbelievably inaccessible. I've seen stuff from people who have actually done overland treks where they've come in from, I believe, from Pakistan from Kyrgyzstan, I think, and have hiked in
It's
Wuhan.
All mountains and shit.
But it's all mountains. It's incredibly inaccessible. There is a border station. The Chinese government has a border station, but it's just not a place that's easy to visit. But long story short, the geography of Afghanistan is incredibly austere, and you also have like we were talking about to the larger point. Here's this country that the Taliban are not popular everywhere, but there are parts of the country where the Taliban are basically local representation. We'll put it that way. And the thing about the Taliban that I think, and I don't want to make excuses for them. I'm not like happy the Taliban are winning, but it's more like we talk a lot about the Taliban as this foreign concept, and that's fair in the sense that, the Taliban represent a really kind of hardline radicalized version of Islam that in a lot of ways is the result of proselytizing from Wahhabism, from the Saudis dumping money into refugee camps in the 1980s. But in terms of the kind of norms that the Taliban are enforcing on people across anywhere they control, that's not that far off from what the sort of traditional norms are in conservative Pashtun areas. It's just that, if you're a Turkmen or you're Tajik or you're Uzbek and you live in northern Afghanistan, that is not at all the case. And, Afghanistan was at one point very cosmopolitan for the region. I mean, the way that people oftentimes nowadays go to India for medical treatment, people in the region rather. I mean, obviously there's people in America and elsewhere who go to India for cheap, relatively cheap medical treatment, but like specialist medical treatment and stuff that people would go to India for now, in the 60s and early 70s, people would go to Afghanistan for that. It was, comparable to Iraq in the sense of like regionally, it was the most developed economy. And obviously that's no longer the case. It's been destroyed by 45 years of civil war. And I say 45 years because Afghanistan has more or less been in internal turmoil since the king was deposed in 1974. And obviously since the Soviets invaded at the end of 1979. But like there was civil war in the provinces before the Soviets invaded. There was resistance to the Afghan communist government. And if you're interested in learning more about that,
the fire.
Yeah, if you're interested in learning more about that, then definitely check out Joe's series on the Soviet-Afghan War, because he goes into a lot of detail about the battles between Parsham and Khalq and why the Soviet Union, what their justification was for overthrowing Hafizullah Amin and installing Karmal, and then all the subsequent stuff that happened. Point being, though, Afghanistan is not a coherent thing, not a coherent place. And I think much like the situation you saw in 2014 when ISIS took over broad swaths of Iraq, the situation you were in there was that you have a lot of, enlistees who are Sunnis who were defending Shia areas. And they're just like, yeah, fuck this. This isn't my fight. And they just fled. And I don't expect that the situation is going to be much different in Afghanistan and areas where the Taliban are operating. The other point that I would make, and this is just a cultural thing, is that in Afghanistan, there is a much more, call it, fluid understanding of like loyalty and alliance with regard to the side of the fight you're on. It is very common for combatants to change sides. And it's not like a change sides and you get made a slave or whatever. Like, it's pretty normal for people to just change sides. That is pretty common. And
you get assigned the squad, RPGs and AK-47, and you're just like, oh, you guys are going to pay me better if I just drag all this shit over to your side and start shooting at these people. That's fine. Like, look, imagine it this way. Imagine if, like, we didn't give a shit in America about federalism and every state was just kind of its own thing, and you took me from Missouri and like, hey, you need to go defend Texas. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to defend my area because, that's my area. That's the shit that I need to deal with. So
you're basically describing America during the period of the Articles of Confederation. But yeah, so the point I would make is that, during the Soviet-Afghan War, it was relatively common for Soviet conscripts from Central Asian socialist republics who were Muslim to defect to the Mujahideen. And they were not like, tortured or killed. They were allowed to become fighters. And there are stories of at least a couple of people. I know at least of one guy who's still alive, but there were numerous people like him who were not Muslim, but they were, ethnic Russians who defected and converted and have stayed in Afghanistan. So that concept of sort of shifting loyalties, that is more common culturally there in my experience. And it's the same reason why, in the Afghan army of today, you'll have people who fought for the Mujahideen and people who fought for the People's Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. You'll have senior officers who were educated at like the Soviet, command and staff college, leading field commanders, captains, majors, etc., who fought in the Mujahideen. So you have and it's not like people all get along and are perfect. I remember seeing guys get in arguments about this shit, about their past, fights with, each other and stuff. But that is way more common than in, let's say, in what you'd consider like European military tradition. You couldn't really just join the Germans if you got captured as an American or vice versa. There are a few really, really weird stories like Castle Itter at the very end of World War II, where you had Wehrmacht soldiers fighting alongside the U.S. Army against the SS. That did happen, but it was so rare that there are numerous books written about that incident, whereas in Afghanistan, it's a little more common. So what I'm saying is that I think this isn't meant to be like a exculpation of the Taliban, but it's more like people on the ground in these districts are like, well, it's literally hopeless for us to fight these guys. They're not like, our side can't win. I'm not going to die for some shit that I know is not going to win. And they're kind of just, leaving the keys in the car. That doesn't surprise me at all. Like at all. I don't know what's going to happen next, but that doesn't surprise me. And the speed with which it's happening does surprise me a little, but not to a huge extent, because I sort of expected this and it aligns with my experience. And when you were, in Afghanistan, Francis, I imagine they were still doing stuff like training the Afghan militia forces and stuff they called AMF and stuff like that. And by the time that I was there, they were ANSF, Afghan National Security Forces. They were training ANA, ANP, Afghan Border Police, National Directorate of Security, all those people.
Again, we're still trying to get the warlords to put their shit down and join. Like we still saw tank on tank shooting of just like warlords fighting each other, like of different provinces that had a shitload of Russian stuff. Like, and then the idea was just like, hey, lay down your arms or give them to the central government and we'll give you, control over your area. It's just, now instead of fighting the dudes next to you, you're going to fight the Taliban, which like, I mean, I don't like, one thing that I really try to stress to Americans is just like the mindset of how shit, like you said, shifting loyalties work isn't so much of a betrayal. It is a survival thing. And some people, some of the warlords would, definitely lay down their arms. Some of them were just like, no, you're going to have to come and get them, or just leave us alone, or, just do. There were a lot of different ideas and plans forward for a lot of these guys. But like before we showed up, it was pretty broken already. We did not improve it. I am not trying to justify any part of our involvement in Afghanistan, but you do have to understand that the Soviets did a number on them well before we did, and the Soviets really, compare just listening to the Soviet-Afghan War series from Joe's show. Comparatively, I know we've been there longer, but we were probably a little bit smarter about it. In that we didn't have thousands upon thousands of people dying in a very short amount of time. What we're saying is Afghanistan is a land of contrasts.
Yeah, and one thing I point out too is something you pointed out, but I would emphasize this, that while U.S. casualties in Afghanistan are low enough at this point, year on year, that there are actually fewer people dying in combat in the entirety of the U.S. military than are dying by suicide in the U.S. military. For the Afghan forces themselves, the casualty rates have been unbelievably bad. Like,
you can't go to the market without wondering if you're going to get blown up.
I mean, and you're hearing stories about stuff, whole outposts being overrun and no one being heard from again, people being killed off duty on a regular basis, buses refusing to pick up Hazaras.
They lost 120 special forces.
Yeah, they had a whole company of SF guys get rolled up. Like, it's all really grim, and I think that this isn't a surprise. And to me, when I think about it, I'm less upset by the fact that these guys are laying their weapons down than I am by all of the grifting bullshit from the part of the US, outsourcing, training them to fucking Dynacorp, and, watching these, shitheads come and bank $200,000-$300,000 a year, training people, not really training them, not taking it seriously. And, we've had 20 years to do this. We've had 20 years to train their military, and we didn't. And some of that was lack of will, lack of a real possible solution. But also a lot of it was the fact that, it was just make work, universal basic income for contractors. And I think you're now seeing the result of that. Ultimately, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm terrified for the people that I care about in Afghanistan, the people that I knew there that are still there. And, a lot of people that I know who were there, who have left, like their families are still there, or their families have had to flee to Pakistan or to Iran to get away from the fighting. It's really grim, and it's just like, man, it's been almost 50 years. I just wish these people could get a fucking break, But at the end of it all, it's not our country, it's not our fight. We fucked it up, but I don't really have a good answer, because I don't want to see this, but I also don't want to see the war continue. So I really don't know what the right answer is. I felt this way in 2009. So the fact that it's now happening, 12 years later, we're coming to the same conclusion after trying the same thing over and over again, is really frustrating. But that seems to be the story of this war in general.
Yeah, everything's sad and depressing, and nobody comes out on top except for the contractors who made a lot of money on the back of human suffering, which is, just generally how the world works these days. Yeah, kind of
par for the course now, isn't it? So you found a piece on a separate note about the National Guard, a couple of pieces really, and one of them was from the Washington Post, and it described the fact that the National Guard and reserves, so reserve component forces across the board, are probably, like, statistically speaking, far more likely to need food assistance. So I'm going to read from this Washington Post piece and then try to get through it decently fast so we can talk, because I have no personal experience in the National Guard. I've worked with the Guard. I trained at Guard bases when I was a cadet, and when I was in Alaska, with Air National Guard people. But I have never been in the Guard. I got out of active duty, and then I just basically let my IRR shit lapse and got my honorable discharge and was done with it. So this headline is: the rising cost of being in the National Guard. Reservists and guardsmen are twice as likely to be hungry as other American groups. National Guard and Reserve soldiers are having trouble feeding their families due to a year of record deployments. Hunger among Guard members and reservists is more than double the national rate, according to the U.S. Census Bureau data from mid-April through early June. They report more food insecurity than nearly any other group, regardless of household income, education, age, or race. Nearly 1 in 5 Guard members report sometimes or often not having enough to eat, and a third of those with a spouse serving in the Guard or Reserves report not having enough to eat. The numbers are even more troubling for National Guard and Reserve families with children. In an ordinary year, when they're not activated or deployed, most reservists or Guard members spend 1 weekend a month running drills and 2 weeks a year, often during the summer, training. This schedule allows most of them to work civilian jobs or get an education as well. It's a similar work schedule for reservists who work for different branches of the military. Over the pandemic, the National Guard has faced longer deployments and periods of activation. They've overseen coronavirus testing, distributed food at the nation's food banks, quelled civil unrest, and more recently helped to administer vaccines, said John Goheen, spokesman for the National Guard Association of the United States, an advocacy group. This is in addition to responding to more natural disasters such as wildfires and floods. The National Guard has declared 2020 the Year of the Guard. Last year, the National Guard was activated for 11 million man days, the highest number since World War II, Goheen said. By comparison, in 2019, there were only 2 million man days. Wayne Hall, a spokesman for the National Guard, said he is skeptical about the food insecurity census data. He says that between the Army and Air National Guard and the different branches of the reserves, there are 1.2 million service members, but the census data only accounts for under 400,000 of them. He said he has not encountered service members who have complained of household hunger. Quote, "These figures are an underrepresentation of the full force," Hall said, and almost a quarter surveyed didn't report. Yet several military advocacy groups said they are seeing rising problems with food insecurity and suggest such problems may be invisible to military leadership. Jennifer Davis, lobbyist for the National Military Family Association, said hungry Guard members and reservists are motivated to seem fine and are hesitant to seek help or reveal financial hardship. Quote, "A service member has to consider promotability and clearances. You can't afford to struggle too badly. You have to keep your bills paid," she said. Quote, "You can lose your clearance if your finances are in a shambles. And we're talking even one bounced check. If it comes between paying the bills and keeping food on the table, there's pressure to pay those bills. And there are concerns about sharing with your leadership that you're struggling to take care of your family because you never want that to come back and haunt you when you're up for promotion." One National Guard member in Georgia said he lost his job as a school teacher last spring as the pandemic began because of his stepped-up Guard schedule. He asked to speak anonymously because his termination is under investigation. Quote, "Why are we activating more National Guard troops than at the height of the war in Afghanistan?" Unquote, the Guard member said. Quote, "You're taking these people away from their families, and for what reason? There's no reason. This is becoming a problem for civilian employers." Unquote. Another National Guard officer who had spent 7 months in uniform since the start of the pandemic, who also asked not to be identified for fear of losing his job, said a full 25% of the National Guard was on active duty last June dealing with the pandemic and civil unrest. Quote, "The shadow issue that affects Guard troops right now is the ludicrous tempo at which they've been activated over the past year. It's hard to find Guard members who have not been told to report in the past year, and everyone has been pulled away from their regular lives," he said. If called up to active duty, low-ranking Guard members and reservists make a base pay of around $3,000 per month. When not on active duty, Guard members get around $200 for a weekend of drills, which is why most have other civilian jobs. The spike in days work takes Guard members and reservists away from their jobs, with many soldiers not drawing that income if they're away on military duty. Even in normal times, military spouses have higher levels of unemployment or underemployment than civilian populations, citing factors like job scarcity near military bases and frequent moves. Moving around can leave military families far from their extended families and increase a non-military partner's childcare burden. But before the pandemic, 22% of military spouses reported being unemployed, according to a large Pentagon survey. Advocacy groups, including the National Military Family Association and Blue Star Families, say they are seeing larger numbers of unemployment among military spouses due to the pandemic. In some cases, military families don't take advantage of food assistance programs. Even before the pandemic, perceived stigma deterred military families who qualified for free or reduced price school meals from taking advantage of such programs, said Josh Protas, Vice President of Public Policy for Mazon, a Jewish hunger organization that works with military families. The past year exacerbated the problem, he said, with many low-income military families not availing themselves of, or even aware of, pandemic EBT, a debit card system that replaced school meals when schools went remote. Another problem involves housing costs, said Matt Pelak, a Guard member in New York City. Usually, a basic allowance for housing doesn't kick in until a deployment is more than 30 days. Many of these deployments are fewer than 30 days, so the military doesn't have to pay the housing allowance, putting an additional financial burden on low-wage soldiers. That means soldiers are paying for their rent or mortgage back home, plus wherever they're living while deployed. Medical insurance often works the same way, adding to the financial squeeze, Goheen said. When Guard members are mobilized or deployed at home, the only time they have medical coverage is if their order is 31 days or longer, he said. Guard members and reservists would then be eligible for the same medical coverage as active duty troops, but those service members activated for less than a month have fewer options and must obtain their own healthcare coverage. Many Guard members and reservists' military pay is not commensurate with their civilian salary, according to PROTUS, and many civilian jobs are not required to pay Guard members their wages during absences or even keep the civilian jobs open for their return. For the teacher in Georgia, the protracted nature of deployments in 2020 took a toll on his standing at work. He said the current level of financial instability and food insecurity had, quote, everything to do with civilian employers and underpaid Guard members, unquote. He said things seemed to be going well at his school, but something changed. He said the administration began asking him to persuade his unit to change his drill dates and bombarded him with, quote, questions that weren't appropriate, unquote. His teaching contract was not renewed. The irony, according to Goheen, is that many of the COVID missions for the Guard were working at American food banks helping to feed the needy. And while the nation is increasingly vaccinated and points to an economic recovery, Guard members and reservists continue to struggle. Some of the Guard members and reservists' financial precariousness is because employers are tired of giving them the time off. All of those absences put extra pressure on other workers and bosses, said the Guard officer who spent 7 months in uniform. Quote, back in spring of 2020, employers were saying, yes, go, fight the pandemic. But as time goes on, they're less enthusiastic, he said. The cracks take time to show with these kinds of things.
So, as the reservist, 20 years reserve, allow me to share with you some of the more fucked things that the Army has done to make sure that, many of these things, as you mentioned, don't come to me. BAH. So basic allowance for housing is the Army gives you money based on your zip code for mortgage, for rent, or whatever. So you can either live on base, which is free. They don't give you anything extra for that because you're living on base, whether it's base housing, barracks, or what have you, depending on your marriage status or your rank. But if you want to go live outward, get an apartment off base or go live outside of the base, you can do that, and the Army gives you BAH. Now, I have had orders that have been for training missions longer than, 30 days. What they do is they give you 2 sets of orders. They give you orders for 2 weeks, and then they give you orders for another 2 weeks. 2 of those equaling up to 30 to 31 days. So that is one of the ways, we're paying you. But see, this way, we don't have to give you extra money. We don't have to give you an extra $800 or $900 for your rent. And BAH was fantastic when I was deployed because you're making all this deployment money. On top of it, you're getting money to pay for your... And it's good money. It's not like they're not lowballing you. It's average. And, I'm broke, so of course I live in places that were cheap. So that's one way. As you said, the healthcare. We don't get any kind of healthcare unless we're paying directly into it. We can pay into TRICARE, and TRICARE is good for healthcare, but you do have to pay into it. And something that you got to understand about a lot of these reservists, National Guards, especially the young ones, man, they don't have jobs that are already established. If you're 20, 21, 22, you don't necessarily have a career that you're established in. You might still be in school. You might, just be working a shitty retail job while you're trying to get to something better. And all these kinds of changes, all these different, all this kind of op tempo, as we call it, operation tempo, which is how fast you're constantly doing all this Army stuff. It has always been spun up. 20 years of war. What do we do other than prepare to go fight the war that we've been fighting for 20 years. And I've read articles that there's no plan on lowering the op tempo now that Afghanistan is done, which why would we? We didn't lower it when Iraq was done in 2011. It's been 10 years since that, and we're still, the Navy's still running ships into their own ships, where the Army is still, has all their shit breaking down. God knows what the fuck the Space Force is or why we have it or what we're doing with it. But, we have a lot of different things that are moving here. And because the National Guard got activated for 4 months or so to protect the Capitol, National Guard gets activated to do wildfire fighting. Even if they're not firefighting, they are, hey, put some soldiers out there to direct traffic, put soldiers out there to make sure that we're doing logistic stuff well. The National Guard, for all the shit that we talk about the Army, the National Guard is a very good idea and in a lot of ways incredible. Outside of standing in protests or whatever with guns and looking scary, when you look at it from the perspective of a state needs a lot of people who are coordinated and we can call up and they can come in and they already know how to do stuff, or we at least can teach them how to do stuff. Or we can just teach them just like, hey, hand out aid, fill sandbags, do this. The National Guard is perfect at that stuff. And that's great. Like, we really leaned hard on the National Guard during the pandemic, especially when the federal and the state COVID vaccine spots started popping up, because you just need people to run them. Like, it's not a violence thing. It is, we need people to direct traffic. We need people to sit and, write stuff down or move vaccines and needles from one place to another. You just need bodies. And that's what the National Guard offers, is we can get bodies here quickly to do the things you need to make sure everybody gets taken care of. And that is the mission. That is the real, down to earth mission of the National Guard. Take care of the people in the state. That's why every state has a National Guard. It's all run by the governor. The problem is that a lot of this activation that's been happening, the National Guard has to pay their own way. So the National Guard is, from their state coffers and whatever federal money they might get, the National Guard is having to pay for that out of their own pocket, which is fine, because usually the federal government ends up reimbursing them. So not only do we have National Guardsmen who are food insecure because they're constantly being deployed, they're constantly being rotated out to be used, which is great, which is wonderful, which is what we need them for. But once again, the U.S. government does its thing where it says, hey, thanks, go fuck yourself now. We got what we needed out of you, so go away. And all of these things that they're talking about, like your security clearance might lapse if you have financial troubles. Absolutely true. Have your credit score dip by 60 points and see how long you hold on to a top secret security clearance. Promotions, and also just like, you're just running so hard, and it's hard to establish yourself at a civilian job while you're constantly being taken away to go do something else. The biggest thing that really pushed me away from the wanting to be in the Army before I started getting into politics and before I really started, feeling like, oh, the Army is dumb and the wars are bullshit, is mostly like I had an established job and I had a wife and I had a kid. I didn't want to be in the fucking Army anymore because the Army takes you away from those things and does not give a shit about you. Like, that is always the Army doesn't fucking care about you. And This is another, and you know what? Maybe the National Guard will get reimbursed. They're $500 million in the hole right now. And if they don't get reimbursed, they have to cancel literally all of their training for the rest of the year, because they've eaten up their budget, and it is federally illegal for them to go over their budget. So we're kind of fucking ourselves in the long run, because guess what? We need them for things like this. We need them to be readily activated and ready to come up, and also want to do it, to want to serve. And it's rough, man. I came back from Iraq and my job didn't exist anymore. And I went through all the channels to be like, oh, I need to, I never quit. I was activated to go to Iraq. I came back and they're not hiring me back. And the thing was, they're like, well, your job just doesn't exist anymore, so we will hire you back to go work in the warehouse for 25 hours a week and half the pay. Perfectly legal. Nothing I could do about that. I had to go find myself another job. That is the reality of being a part-timer, is that you constantly have this like fucking sword of Damocles hanging above you. That is just, when will the federal government decide that it needs you, or when will the state government decide that it needs you? And 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year is great, but like, I'm sorry, if you're activating civilians for chunks of time for like a month or 2 months or 3 months, you're fucking them. You're really fucking them. And that's, I would be less concerned about soldiers getting fucked civilian wise during the last year if I knew that they were being helped in another way. If I knew that the federal government's like, yes, we're going to give you all the funding you need. Yes, we're going to give you BAH. Yes, we're going to make sure that everybody is not food insecure. But like, man, it's hard because you're not establishing, and also as a National Guard or a reserve person, you're not going to establish yourself as a soldier either, because you're 1 weekend a month. So you're not going to really make a whole lot of fucking money there. So this has been like, I've been watching the National Guard be used and abused, and I personally feel real sorry for him. Because no matter what role, like, it's hard to find a National Guardsman that hasn't been activated in some way, shape, or form over the last 5 years. There it's hard to find somebody who hasn't been grabbed from their normal day-to-day life and put inside of a situation where, hey, you know what? I'm not saying they didn't sign up for it, but like once they're done with that situation, they should be able to reintegrate themselves back into their civilian world. That's the whole point. We want them here. We want them local. We want local people. We want Missouri people doing Missouri National Guard because but and then in the end, they end up just getting fucked. And it's just, it's a story forever told. And I really feel for them. But like, as soon as they started, the first time they started doing the National Guard, like after January 6th, they had the National Guard outside of the Capitol. People were bringing up, the bad conditions and the bad pay. It's like, man, that shit was going on for a long time beforehand. And it's just that this time it was in front of Congress people. This one time, everybody said, oh, yes, our heroes are here to keep us safe. We need to give them cots and pizzas and this, that, and the other thing. And how terrible it is for the soldiers to be out there. And there was a lot of public outcry and blah, blah, blah. And it's all just PR. It's a PR thing. And then it goes away. And then you just continue to have people getting fucked because they're no longer in front of Nancy Pelosi.
One thing that I think is really telling about the situation with the way the Guard are treated with, concerning deployments and activation orders and things along those lines is that it mirrors the same logic that gets used to screw hourly workers out of full-time benefits.
Yep.
That knowing that there will be additional costs incurred for giving people things like money to pay their rent and health insurance, they go out of their way to activate people for just under 30 days so that those don't kick in. And I think that if that bothers you, I think that it's right to be bothered by it because it's so obviously predatory and cynical. And my second point would be that is not just the way things have been for the Guard, it's also how things have been for hourly workers for as long as employers have been able to get away with it. And it shouldn't surprise you that this is happening, for federalized state employment on a temporary basis because this logic has governed the U.S. economy forever and ever.
To close out, let me tell you the first time that this bullshit ever touched me was my first deployment to Afghanistan, where my orders specifically say 364 active duty days of deployment. So that includes my 2 weeks. My 4 weeks of leave. So I had 2 week mid-tour leave and then 2 weeks terminal leave at the end of it. And then I found out that they said 364 days because if I had done a full year, I would have been entitled to a shitload more retirement benefits. Now, I've done more deployments, more active duty time since then. But this was 2004, like the height of all of. I mean, we're balls deep in Iraq and Afghanistan at this point. The money is going everywhere, but yet, my individual augmentee ass who is going out to just, attach to another unit only gets 364 days because one more day might give me an extra $100 a month when I retire. If I retired, because you gotta keep in mind I was only 21 at the time. So it's been going on forever. Like the thing is that soldiers have always been getting fucked. And at times I really wish that soldiers would stop having Stockholm syndrome about this, about like, well, the army beats me because it loves me. No, nothing beats you because it loves you. The army just doesn't give a fuck about you.
Yeah. And hustle culture shouldn't be your only protection from your, the state dragooning you into military service. I mean, I realize it's voluntary, but you're in an unfavorable power relationship, and it shouldn't be like, oh, well, my wife does fucking multi-level marketing shit, and that's how we don't starve. Like, that's insane. That should not be happening. I heard stories all the time, people being like, well, why should fast food workers get $15 an hour? EMTs only make $11 an hour. It's like, well, they should both be paid more. Both of them.
Everybody should be getting more money.
Everyone should be paid more. And that's the thing. It's just, you can see this stuff happening where there's this duality of, here are our brave heroes doing brave, heroic things. And by the way, we schedule them for exactly 39 and a half hours a week, so we don't have to pay them full-time benefits. Like, basically, the people who are installing sandbags as flood barriers or administering COVID inoculations are also, being treated like the way Walmart and Starbucks, even, companies that would like to burnish their liberal credentials, or companies like Walmart that are just full on fucking evil. That's how they manage their bottom line is by fucking people over on technicalities like that.
You want to know something even more fucked? Some of those National Guards people probably were the essential frontline heroes, so they got fucked in two different ways.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they weren't able to get expanded unemployment insurance, and then also are not getting paid. Yeah, man, it's grim as hell. But
never join the army.
Yeah, do not join the military,
especially not the National Guard. If you want to have a career, if you're going to do like one of those, I'm going to be a National Guard but work full time, then I guess. But oh boy, it's not great to be a National Guardsman out there.
That being said, on a lighter note, Francis, you have a bonus episode with Kelsey where you talk about military astrology.
Yes. So the United States Army Instagram account, for some reason, a couple of weeks ago, put out here's the MOS you should pick up while you are, depending on your astrological sign. Now, it's very obvious the things they picked were like, here's things that we are kind of low on. Please join the Army if you're a veterinarian or a physical technician or whatever. But Kelsey, she is an avid lover of the Zodiac. And so when I was making fun of it, she was making fun of it as well. And said to me, I need to come on and we need to sort this out. So we have gone through the Zodiac and we have talked about what MOS you should join. As an Aries, I should have been an Army Ranger, apparently, because we're just a bunch of Aries or a bunch of, just a bunch of dumbasses, I guess. I don't know. I can't remember. I'm not really into astrology myself, which is why I got Kelsey to come on. But God bless her for doing it. The Capricorn traits: full-grown adult since age 6, the responsible friend, motivated by duty, takes a while to warm up to people, represses any emotion that gets in the way of success. Holy shit, I think this is kind of dead on.
So, I would disagree because I have a very specific vision for a Capricorn. So my husband's a Capricorn. We're sister signs on the zodiac wheel, which is fine. It's very good. We complement each other very well. And when I think of a Capricorn, I think about a lot of the traits that you just read off, right? Like they are not very emotional. They are extremely professional, extremely confident. Like the sort of Aries or the sort of leader that Aries wish they were is what a Capricorn is. And for me, this is just a dead-eyed S3. That's the only thing a Capricorn could ever be. Just an absolutely dead-eyed S3 grinding from 0-5 to 2000 every single day.
Do you think this is an E5 or an E7?
Ooh, I think that this is an E8, like ops NCO, or like an O4. Like that's
like a master sergeant.
Yeah, like a master sergeant in the ops room, or a O4 just slogging away, putting out fragos. And to be candid, like that's the sort of person you want in the S3 shop. Like God knows you don't want a Gemini, but a Capricorn, things are going to run pretty smoothly. They're just also going to have no joy.
Yeah, I would agree. It's somebody who like, and the S3 is always the one that like you're always a little kind of just like, I have to steel myself to go talk to this person,
right?
Because it's not personal. You have to understand it's not personal. This person is very busy.
Yeah.
They have time for you, but you need to, they have a specific time for you and you need to be prepared for that specific time. And if you're not, that's fine. You can come back at another time, but don't come back unprepared because you're just going to get thrown out. Because the S3 is busy.
Right.
The Capricorn's got some shit to do.
100%.
Yeah, I do notice that I learned so much about Seaburn from your husband because he seems to really enjoy talking about chemicals and whatnot, which kind of falls into the same thing. Like, I make fun of Seaburn people because, I mean, they're Seaburn. What do you do? Make sure that my ProMass fits every 6 months? Congratulations. But he's into it, so I like it.
Yeah, well, the thing about Ian is he's into it because it's his job. Right? Like he just has to do his job really, really well because he's a Capricorn. And that lends to the sort of conversations he has about it.
So our best careers are accountant, lawyer, landlord, Sisyphus, or elementary school hall monitor.
Sisyphus just threw me, but okay.
You know what? It's a person who will keep slogging away at a thing, even though the rock's going to keep rolling down the hill.
That's fair. It's just, I don't know if that's something I would say is a career. I'd say this is like mythological creature or story that whatever. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, as far as you have to be a punished Greek god. I guess Sisyphus is better than getting my liver torn out while chained to rocks every day.
Mm-hmm.
Our famous Capricorns: Martin Luther King Jr., Jeff Bezos, Michelle Obama, Dolly Parton, Chairman Mao, and Edgar Allan Poe.
Yep, that sounds good.
Yeah, a lot of very driven people here. All right, Aquarius, infantry officer.
No.
Designed to be dependable and loyal leaders, an infantry officer might be calling your name. Now, the Aquarius on CoStar says purposefully esoteric, doesn't do feelings, just concepts. Actually believes in conspiracy theories, more in love with humanity as a whole than individuals, always feels like an outcast, and fetishizes personal freedom. That doesn't sound right. Is that right?
I mean, honestly, I have an Aquarius rising and it does sound right. Like Aquarius is kind of, they like get off on being unique, right? Like I think about Aquariuses as like hipsters before hipsters were a thing. Like they're just so special and they have such a better understanding of the world than any of us. And how do you not eat vegan? Like that kind of shit.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why it's hard for me to place them in a specific MOS. I don't know. What do you think?
Let's see. Somebody who believes in. I mean, this just feels like. What does this feel like? Always feels like an outcast, fetishizes personal freedom.
They're definitely loners. Like it's a Doc Martin situation. Like activist is what I usually think about with Aquarius.
Okay,
like an insufferable one, and I don't know how that meshes with the army necessarily.
Best careers: professional dilettante, bohemian, casual anthropologist, rioter or looter, artificial intelligence, or armchair philosopher. So this is you know what this is? This is just a general.
Yeah.
This is just like once you pin your first star, you just become an Aquarius.
Oh man, that's not something I want to think about. I mean, I could also think about them as if they're doing something that they think is really important, that could be an Aquarius too, right? Like they have to have purpose behind what they're doing. So I don't know. The army has social workers. That could be something an Aquarius could do. Yeah, maybe.
Social worker does kind of work, with the doesn't do feeling, just concepts.
Yeah.
More in love with humanity as a whole than individual. See, that just doesn't sound like somebody who wants to work with individual people.
Yeah.
So maybe this would be like a cyber command person, like just go in that room and look at a computer for 12 hours a day and tell us, where to go or who to shoot or whatever, something along those lines.
I think an Aquarius would be a pretty good drone operator, honestly. If they could divorce themselves from the politics of it all, I think that would be a good job for them.
You know who else? Maybe it's just because I have come across a person who fits all of this very well. I don't know if they're an Aquarius or not, but I've had a couple of supply sergeants that are very much like this.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
My last supply sergeant, who I heard multiple times talk about how we never landed on the moon. But you know what? He's very good at what he did as a supply sergeant and very nice to be around. He was just also very crazy in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't really like people, but he liked the idea of people. So
okay,
works for me. All right, and finally, our last one, Pisces. Now, Pisces is where they put the JAG Corps. JAG Corps attorney will bring out the best in you. Honest and a passion for helping people will prove powerful in court. CoStar says somehow both 5 and 50 years at once. Thinks everything is a sign. Can't remember if they dreamt it or if it actually happened. Excessively romantic, prone to fantasy, and no boundaries. I've known a lot of people who are very much like this. And to be fair, sometimes I can be like this. I just don't really feel like there's a place for you to be in the army. Your best careers are volunteer therapist. So I don't know, maybe a chaplain, curbside fortune teller, amateur poet, sad clown, orb of light, or vapor.
Yeah, so Pisces are very, very sensitive like Cancers, except instead of internalizing that emotion, they sort of turn it into art. So they're usually very musical or very artistic. They might be someone who would like walk up to you and be like, you know what, your aura is just beautiful today.
God, it's those people. All right.
So for me, that either like I had an old neighbor who used to she blessed my crystal ball with something and like was very, very sincere about it. That's kind of what a Pisces is like for me.
Okay.
So I think someone working in behavioral health could be a Pisces, but the Army also has a lot of careers that are pretty artistic. Like we have graphic designers, we have photographers in public affairs, we have people in the band. Something like that might be good for a Pisces, where it's not a stereotypical Army job, but you're still able to express your artistic side while serving in a military capacity.
Rest in peace to the 25 mics out there. Combat Crayola, no longer a thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, they can be a DA civilian, whatever. We chop that
out. Let's see. Okay, so we went through that. I'm glad we're kind of ending on this one. Our famous Pisces are Nina Simone, Rihanna, Victor Hugo, Rosa Luxemburg. So I'm an Aries, but March 28th. So I'm close. So is that like a Pisces rising? Is that how that works?
No. So to figure out your chart, you have to figure out what time you were born. And I just plug it into this sketchy website with like way too many porn ads. It like basically looks at what the stars looked like at the moment you were born above where you were. So you also need the location, just like a city is fine. And then it goes into from that what your rising and your moon sign is. And then there's a bunch of other stuff like which house Venus is in, whatever. That we usually just talk about the big three to be simple.
And what does the star chart end up giving me?
So it gets very specific, man. Like there's a certain characteristic of your star chart that's basically like, how would you respond if someone cheated on you? Like, and that has a different sign like attached to it. So it gets really into the weeds, but that's not necessary for anyone who is employed generally.
Hey everybody, so thanks for listening. You can follow me at Army Strang, follow Nate at In These Deserts, and follow the podcast at Hell of a Way. Be sure to keep an eye out for more bonus episodes that we've got coming out, more videos on the YouTube, and just us all around shit posting, making fun of England and the Army both at the same time as we do on our podcast.
Yeah, thanks again for listening. We hope you enjoy, and we will talk to you next week.